Okay, now we move on to actual flesh, which, to be honest, the Tamiya paint flesh is kind of I don't in particular like the flesh color. So you can see it's a little bit too dark for like skin tone. Just a little bit too dark. Not because I have something against dark skin or whatever, it just doesn't look as if it is suitable for like the character, which as you can see is like this, you know. You don't want this kind of almost apricot-y kind of color tone, so adding a little bit white, that'll do it. Now we take a white brush. Should be the right consistency, and then we can begin. You want to take a small brush. Don't take anything too big. Don't make yourself work harder than you have to. Just get it soaked in paint. Because the face is only this big, you don't need to worry too much about other places. We can just paint it on. As you can see, that might look a little bit pale. So what we might want to do is adding a little bit of pink just to make everything a little bit more alive, essentially. Now you really don't want a lot, just like a tiny hint of pink. That's all you need for the face, and wait for it to dry up. I think what you can safely do now is actually paint the pants, which are white. That one's actually quite straightforward. You just add in the flat white and start painting. Because we don't have shoes here, all we can see is the white pants. So that way, you know, you're not interfering with any of the other parts that are currently drying. So take a brush, just dab it all over. Again, not too much, especially at this kind of small joints. Paint naturally want to build up into like a surface. So the thinner you paint, the less likely you're gonna have some build up. You can always come back and just paint it again afterwards, which, you know, that's always an option. It's better than just having to paint all over again. Oh, okay. It didn't tell you to actually have another paint, but like there's also an undercoat that's supposed to be brown. I'm gonna paint it brown. Okay, we'll stick it on. Wait until it dries, and then we'll paint it again and again. Yeah. In the meanwhile, let's find a flat brown. That'll work. Yeah, we'll add that in later. I mean, if you have primer, adding in like a spray painting or just hand painting a layer of primer will work as well, but once again, with models this small, it tend to just take up a little bit more space. Or if you don't have primer, just apply a little bit more layers and you'll still be fine. Now you can see the pens are coming along. Just leave it here to dry a little bit more. I think that should be the final layer. Once this one is done, we don't need to do more white anymore. Also, we basically leave white paint out for a while, so we're gonna add a little bit of thinner just so our brush doesn't dry up completely. There we go. Just add a little bit more. Flat base into the blue, and we're gonna do the hair again with like a flat based coat. That way it's not glossy, like oily and those kind of, just overall like oily hair or just paint over. The flat base is gonna make it a little bit light colored, but it's okay. It generally doesn't interfere with too much coloring. Now, before you ask, we are going to take like an entire day for everything to dry up, so this is going to take a while. Painting is never like a straightforward process. You're going to wait for paint to dry. Always take a little bit of time. Okay. Now we don't need to worry about the hair anymore. Let's take a look at other parts are generally okay. Now comes the fun part. We wait for paint to dry. Okay, let's go for the small detail between the two coats. Like, she has an outer coat and pants, but there's like a brownish undercoat inside. We're gonna do that. It's gonna be a little bit tricky, so I'll go with a smaller kind of brush. Like these ones that are kind of worn out, they're actually perfect for this job. Just take some paint. It's a small enough area. I can get away with not using a dish for it. And just kind of gently eyeball it. Come onto the pencil a little bit. You can always take a knife, gently scrape it off. Can add a little bit of white paint later on, just to cover everything up. I mean, I'm not known to have the most steady hands. Like, people with my kind of shaky hands can do it. Everybody can do it. You just have to know how to compromise for your mistake. Like, how can you do to fix when you actually did make a mistake? What do you do with this? How do you fix it? That's more important. That's more trial and error. more so than anything. To quote Bob Ross, happy painting. Yeah, like you have to enjoy it. It doesn't matter if you're good or bad at it. As long as you enjoy it, you know, you're gonna get better eventually. Now, people's level of better might be different, but like better nonetheless, right? Okay, so now that it's sufficiently dry, you can always do some detailing with something other than paint. For example, like a marker, you can add a little bit of highlight onto the red part. Once they dry on, they're gonna show like a different tone of red. Gives it a little bit more texture, kind of like fabric kind of texture, and just let it dry on there. Doesn't have to be too much, just gently tap on the two joints and that'll be okay. Now that this is mostly dry, we're gonna try to at least paint the pink part before today ends. I mean, painting does require a bit of time, mostly just waiting for the paint to dry. But yeah, you can scrape off some paint. But because we're gonna do the whole body essentially, because it's a pink coat, detailing we can go out on top of the paint. So I'm gonna need a lot more than before. So add a little bit of thinner, just a bit, like not too much, just a little bit of paint thinner. Otherwise, you know, it's too thin and it'll be too runny. Take a pen, brush it off a little bit, and there we go. Now, it's gonna be slightly different from your machine pink, but then again, in the show, it's never exactly the same. So, doesn't look too different. See? See? From that, might look a little bit different from the outside. We're gonna do the outside differently. So, we'll start painting. Do the back first. Because that part you don't need too much discretion. You just go in. Because the entire part is pink. Now, figure has like a yellow trim. You can leave the trim out, or you can paint the entire thing and just paint the yellow on top of the pink. Doesn't matter too much in this case, because they're both light color, and pink doesn't, well, it doesn't seep through very much. Now for the trim, I probably am gonna do a little bit of masking. With hand painting, you usually don't need to mask too much, but like for these kind of small detail, it doesn't hurt to do so. Sometimes it's nice to keep the thinner handy. That way you can moist up the paint a little bit, because after a while, especially acrylic paint, which is a great beginner's paint, because it's not only water soluble, you can wash it off with water, which, yeah, you don't need special thinners to actually clean the utensil afterwards, which that's nice. That's less maintenance. Other kind of paints, they generally are more durable, but like they require a lot more. You need special cleaning agent. They also are a bit more noxious. Some of them, you know, don't smell that great. Acrylic, you generally, you know, you don't even need a mask when you do this. Well, nowadays you need a mask for pretty much everything, but if you're at home and painting with acrylic paint, you don't really need a mask, because it's water soluble. It's gonna, even if you inhale it, it's gonna go through your metabolism and you pee it out, essentially. Things that are not water soluble tend to be a little bit more toxic. So that's what I'm saying. So yeah, great beginner kind of paint. Everyone can try it. You can pick it up pretty soon, and they don't look that bad. And some people do think acrylic is less like durable in the long run, but I've had models I painted like more than 10 years ago with acrylic paint. They haven't, you know, they haven't gotten bad or anything. If you keep them away from dust, they generally are okay. So about acrylic paints, they never truly dry up. They still are a little bit like soluble even after 10 years. So if you're in a very dusty environment, they tend to catch up to a lot of dust. That's the only downside about acrylic paint, in my opinion. But like, they look okay. They're pretty colorful, and they're readily available. They're cheaper than most other paints, so why not? So, gonna add in the details later on tomorrow when everything is dried. But I think that's pretty much today. Okay, now to take a look, the hair is actually completely dry. Hair pieces, because I left it dry overnight, so now we just move on to the body and add in a little bit of detail from yellow and gold, and then we're set. We're set to put in the eye, which is a water transfer. I'm gonna show you guys how to do it. Just take a tweezer afterwards, but right now, let's go for the yellow. You want the yellow to be quite thick, because you're adding in highlight. You don't want it to run too much, so I'm not even gonna use a thinner. Just gonna get the thicker kind of paint and work my way into it. Now this is gonna be one of the more difficult jobs because you're adding in highlights. So yellow parts are essentially all the buttons, all the lines on the skirt, and everything else. And yeah, let's just go in. Now, as I was saying, acrylic paint never really completely dries off. It just kind of doesn't run anymore, so you want to be extra careful when you're doing this. You don't want to apply too much pressure on the actual paint job you finished, because you risk a chance of smushing it. I was saying the other day, I actually don't have the most steady hand, so in terms of actually doing this kind of paint job, I'm not the best person, not even like a very good person. I just kind of enjoy doing it, and not bad. I mean, not horrible, but like I'm no expert either. But the thing is, you just have to enjoy what you do, you know, find happiness in what you're doing right now, and that's the most important part. Whether you do a very good job on your first model, whether you're a seasoned veteran that want to try something new, and yeah, you just go ahead and do it, and you feel rewarded afterwards. And if you don't feel this is rewarding, then by all means, move on to another hobby. Eventually you'll find a hobby that suits you, right? So you don't want the paintbrush to be too big. Just kind of want to dab at the surface because most of these are like trims on the clothing, so it's like a highlight. So you don't go too deep and the color will just kind of rub off on to the model. Now, on the actual machine, you don't need to do nearly as much as this. This is mostly because like character models, they're confined by their like ability to make different parts. So all they're gonna do is give you like some detailing onto the actual model and just have to paint the rest. I mean, Vancouver nowadays is really good for painting because it's dry, like the weather is very dry, so paint dries up very quickly. You leave it overnight, it's almost completely dry. Whereas in wintertime, you're confined by like humidity in the air. You sometimes have to wait for like months before you can proceed with another model because that one hasn't finished drying yet. Still wet somehow. Now, since the weather is dry, you might need a little bit of paint thinner later on because at the beginning the consistency is pretty good. But once you paint it for a few minutes, it becomes more difficult. So you add in a little bit of thinner just to make it less dry, loosen it up a little bit, and then just continue. That's the most difficult part. And we're gonna check the manual to see if it actually has any more. Yeah, just the two front. And we're gonna add in the gold just on some of the buttons. Then we're gonna do like a finish, which is like a very thin down version of the black paint, just to add some highlight into some of the detailing, and then we're done. Okay, and I think we're done this part. Just gonna move on to the next one. Okay, so the next part is gonna be the final part. We're gonna do detailing on the small detail on the model and just wrap up the pilot portion. I am gonna start to paint the actual mecha part, but that's gonna take longer, and also I had to finish the pilot before I start the mecha. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and I'll see you guys next time.